This video is going to have a look at the fight or flight response. And again, if you look at your specification, it says you need to know the fight or flight response and also the role of adrenaline. So I'm going to set you a scene. Okay, you're walking down a dark street at night by yourself. Suddenly you hear what you suspect are footsteps approaching you rapidly. Okay, what happens? Well, your systematic nervous system is going to kick in. Your body is going to prepare itself for, do I have to defend myself or will I have to escape? Okay, so things like your heart rate start to increase, your breathing rate start to increase. All of that is controlled by your sympathetic nervous system. We're going to have a look at this process of how your body actually stimulates all of these different processes, increasing heart rate, increasing breathing rate. How does it happen step by step? So fight or flight is a common term. I'm sure all of you have heard it. And really, this is the processes that enable the body to protect itself in dangerous situations. And we protect ourselves in one of two ways. Either we run away or we fight. So hence the fight or flight response. Okay, in every dangerous scenario, we're going to do one of two things. We're going to fight it or we're going to run away, flee, flight. Okay. Right, some key terms you need to know while we're moving through this particular video. The first one is acute stresses. And acute stress is basically short-term stress, like our example of someone coming up behind you in a dark alley. Okay, it's something that is going to be very, very short-term. It happens and your body deals with it. And this is what the fight or flight response is related to. Second type of stress you can have are chronic stresses. And these are long-term stresses, long-term worries, like you lot worrying about your exams months in advance. Well, most of you worrying about your exams months in advance. So I just want to recap on the types of glands that are going to be involved in this process and in this stress response. We've got two, the pituitary gland, that master gland, and also our adrenal gland. Okay, so these parts of our endocrine system are going to be involved in the fight or flight response. And again, we said our body has two types of stress, acute stress and chronic stress. And our body deals with these two things in completely different ways. And we're going to look at both of the processes that occur in our body in response to stress. So the first one we're going to look at is acute stress. Okay, and this is something called the SAM or SAM response. To chronic stress, our body responds completely differently. And it responds in something called the HPA axis. So we've got acute stress, SAM response, chronic stress, HPA axis. And we're going to look at both of these processes. So the first one we're going to have a look at is how our body responds to short-term stress, to acute stress. And this is known as the SAM or SAM system. It's important you remember what it's called because these letters all refer to parts of the pathway. So, the autonomic nervous system, if you remember, this is the thing in charge of automatic processes within our body. Okay, and it governs a lot of the release of different hormones in the stress response. And if you remember, the autonomic nervous system has two main parts, parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate, increases breathing rate, whereas our parasympathetic system brings everything back to normal. So, quick diagram. You can see sympathetic nervous system is accelerating our heart rate, is dilating our bronchi, so we're breathing in more. Whereas our parasympathetic nervous system is in charge of things like reducing your heart rate, reducing your breathing rate. Okay, so sympathetic nervous system is really important for increasing certain actions, and the parasympathetic nervous system generally decreases the activity of bodily functions. So, our sympathetic nervous system is what prepares the body for the flight or fight response. It's getting us prepared for action or flight, whichever one we need to do. And the parasympathetic nervous system will return our body from fight or flight back to normal. So we're going to have a look at this SAM response now, the SAM. And it starts with the autonomic nervous system. And that sympathetic branch, that's why it's got the S at SAM system, the sympathetic branch is stimulated. Okay, and the next thing is what it does, the sympathetic branch of the nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla. Okay, and that's where we get the A and the M from. So we've got sympathetic branch to stimulate, which then stimulates the adrenal medulla. And the adrenal medulla, you should be able to get from the word adrenal, releases adrenaline. Okay, and adrenaline is that part of that hormone that will increase our heart rate, increase our breathing rate, etc. Okay, so it brings about that fight or flight response. Sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla, which releases adrenaline, which increases heart rate and breathing rate. Okay, that is the flight or fight response. That is how the physiological processes occur in our body every time you get a little bit stressed, especially from a short-term stressor. Okay, so now the threat's going to pass. The footsteps that you were hearing, you now realise that it was a very good friend who wants to walk you back to your house. Okay, so you suddenly feel a huge sigh of relief. Okay, but your body takes a little bit longer to get back to normal. Your heart rate's still going to be a little bit high for a while. And in order for our body to return to normal, that's when the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. Okay, it brings all those bodily systems back to normal. And this is quite slow acting. Okay, the sympathetic nervous system is really quick, it increases your heart rate really fast. But the parasympathetic nervous system takes a little bit longer, several minutes, even more time, to get it back to a normal state. So, like I said, our body responds completely differently to different types of stress. You've seen the SAM response, the sympathetic nervous system, adrenal medulla, adrenaline, increasing heart rate, every time something short-term happens to us. But our body responds completely differently to chronic or long-term stress. So use yourself, if you've been worrying about your exams for weeks or months now, and you've still got time to go and worry, this is what's going to be happening in your body. It's this HPA axis. And it will explain to you why people usually get ill close to exam time. So, in the HPA axis, we also have different glands involved. These different letters, H, P, and A, like the sound from, all stand for different things. So the H is part of the hypothalamus found in the brain. The P, we've got the master gland again, the pituitary gland, and A, our adrenal gland. So the pituitary and adrenal gland you should be recognizing are those key glands involved in the stress response. So the HPA axis is activated if stress continues over a long period of time. So it starts all in the hypothalamus, in your brain. And the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland. So now the pituitary gland sends out a hormone, we've already seen this one in a different video, called ACTH. Okay, so we've got H, the hypothalamus, we've got P for the pituitary gland, we've got A for ACTH. As long as you remember it's the HPA axis, it gives you the starting steps, those starting building blocks for this process. So what ACTH does is it stimulates your adrenal cortex to release something called cortisol. Okay, remember adrenal cortex, remember the C there and the C in cortisol. The adrenal cortex produces cortisol. In the previous one we had the adrenal medulla producing adrenaline. But an easy way to remember it is adrenal cortex, there's a C in cortex, the adrenal cortex produces cortisol. Okay, produces cortisol. And cortisol's main job really, it's an anti-inflammatory, so it brings about reductions in swelling, but it also suppresses our immune system. So you can imagine, if you're worrying about your exams over and over and over again, all that's going to happen is more cortisol is going to be released into your body, and it's going to reduce the number of white blood cells, it's going to reduce your immune system, and that's why you become sick if you worry too much about your exams over and over and over. So let's have a look one more time. These key words, H for hypothalamus in the brain, stimulates your pituitary gland, the HP, and A, the adrenal cortex, which releases cortisol into your body and can suppress your immune system. So, you need to know those two different paths. Acute stress, chronic stress, the SAM response, the HPA axis, and the different steps that occur in each of those.